Hey bees, I'm Marie from Humblebee and Me, and today we are making our first Christmas soap of 2016. So this one is a lumps of coal soap, and so I've designed it to look like lumps of coal. And you can make them in really any size you want. So if you know you just want to give a couple gifts and you want to give like big lumps of soap, you can make them big. Or if you want to do like a little baggie that's just got like a bunch of little nubs and coal in it, like little guest soaps, you can totally make them smaller. You can make some big, you can make some small. You can basically do whatever you want. You can also use really whatever bar soap base recipe you want. The one I've used is awesome, but really anything that you happen to have all the ingredients for and be comfortable with is a great choice for this recipe. This recipe really has just two parts that require effort at least. We'll do the making the batter part, and in that part we're going to add our essential oils, which is this lovely sweet vanilla with a sort of a hint of smoke and cool fresh air. And then we're going to add some activated charcoal, or you could use black iron oxide or even Australian black clay to get a dark charcoal-y color. And we'll let that saponify for about a day. At that point, you'll remove it from your mold, but instead of slicing it and setting those beautiful, neat slices aside to age for 3 months, we're gonna go all Play-Doh on that soap and form it into lumps of coal. As a final touch for my lumps of coal soap, I dusted them with some dark blackish grayish micas to give them a slightly darker tint and to give them a little bit of that charcoal touch. It is a little messier for sure than not doing that, but it'll wash off the first time you use the bar of soap. So to me, not that big of a deal, but maybe if you happen to know that your recipient is a lover of white towels or perhaps just doesn't enjoy much of a mess, you can leave that part out. That's completely up to you. All right, let's go make some lumps of coal soap. So we're starting with our melted fats and our lye water. So I melted these fats and made this lye water about 8 hours ago, and so I've let them come to room temperature. So this is just my 100% room temperature soaping method, where you just let everything come to room temperature. It's great to do the sort of the melting and the combining part before you go to bed, and then make your soap the following morning. So we're going to add the lye water to our fats. And this is pretty much the most dangerous part of making soap, when your lye water is all concentrated like this. So at this point in time, if you spilt it on yourself, it would be like spilling a giant pot of boiling water on yourself. Not good. Now that it's in here, it's heavily diluted, and it gets less and less dangerous from this point on, because as we reach trace, it gets thicker and thicker, and your spills become sort of less and less messy, basically. You can imagine the difference between spilling pudding and spilling water, right? One will spread significantly further than the other. So I'm going to give that a bit of a stir, and then I'm going to set this aside. I'm actually just going to pop this in our lye pot, and I've got my stick blender here, and let's get this going to trace. All right, we've achieved trace. You can see that when I do this, you can just see a little hint of the drooling soap off the spatula, and just leaves a trace in the top of the soap. So I'm going to keep blending this for another minute or so, and then we'll add the clay, and then we'll be ready to divide this into 2 batches and decorate it. So it's gotten a bit thicker, and that trace is just a little bit more obvious. And now it's time to add our clay. So I've just got some white kaolin clay here, and add that. I like to use quite a lot. That's more than most people recommend, but I've used quite a lot more than this in other recipes, and I love the way it turns out. So no worries. So make sure you use your immersion blender to really blend it up so you don't have any clumps. You can stamp it down so that you're really capturing it. All right, give that a stir. I'm not seeing any noticeable clods of clay, so we are ready to divide this in half. So you certainly don't have to divide your soap batches in half, but I find that I like to do the legwork of the mixing and the trace once, and then do the decorating twice. So I'll make one batch of batter, divide it in half by weight, and then make 2 different batches of soap from it. So set our immersion blender aside, and I'm gonna grab my scale here. And so what I've done is I've added up the weights of everything that's in this pot. So that's all the fats and all the water and all the sodium hydroxide. And so I have that number here and I've written it down, and we're gonna divide it by weight. And this part's really important. You gotta divide by weight. Do not try to eyeball it. You will be wrong every time. I know, because I did it a bunch of times that way before actually learning my lesson. All right, close enough. That's within a few grams at least. And so when you're considering which batch you want to do first, there's a few things to think about. One, if you want to do something fancy and fiddly, you might consider doing that batch first, because the batch that is sitting will thicken up as it sits. Something else to consider is if one of them is going to be a significantly darker color than the other, do that one last, so that way you don't have to clean your immersion blender. All right, so we are ready to make the second half, or decorate the second half of this soap. So this is going to be a Christmas soap, and this is going to be our sort of lumps of coal soap. So you definitely don't need to use a soap recipe base that includes hemp oil, because we are just making this black, but you totally can, because of course hemp oil is good for your skin, and the black will just completely cancel that out. So I have here some activated charcoal and a little bit of olive oil. And so we want to make this dark, but we don't want to make it ridiculously dark, because then it makes the soap a little tricky to use, especially if you like white towels. So we are aiming for just dark enough, and it will lighten up during saponification. We'll toss the soap chunks with a little bit of mica and other colorants to give them a darker look on the outside, so they don't have to be quite as dark on the inside, but still, just something to keep in mind. So of course the amount of pigment that you're going to want to use is going to be entirely dependent on the size of the batch of soap you're making. So don't fuss too much about how much I'm using. Just use enough to color the batch of soap you're making to sort of the shade of deep gray-black that you are happy with. I'm actually going to scoop some of this in here to help us not waste any of our black pigment here. So we can use that to pick up the last of this, and then we can scrape that in. Now that is not nearly dark enough for me, so I'm going to go get some more charcoal. If you don't have activated charcoal, you can use black iron oxide or even Australian black clay, which has honestly very few other uses, so that's a pretty good choice instead of the activated charcoal. All right, I like that. That is convincingly dark gray, but also not, hopefully not going to stain anybody's delicates. So now we can add our essential oils. So this here is a blend of cedarwood, benzoin, and the teensiest amount of birch tar. Birch tar is super, super smoky. You could use vetiver or cade if you have those. And yeah, you gotta really err on the side of caution with it. I want like warm woody vanilla with just like a slight hint of wood smoke. And it is very easy to accidentally make something that just smells like a house fire that had a bottle of vanilla in the kitchen. Okay, and now we're going to put this in our mold as well. So the fancy things that we'll be doing with this soap, we will be doing after the first 24 hours of saponification. So this is just a super simple pour. We're not fussing with anything fancy here at all. I'm gonna turn that around so you can see what I'm doing. Does that work? Kind of, maybe? Hope so. All right, turning that back around so that I can see what I'm doing. So with that poured, all that is left to do is set it to saponify for 24 hours, and then we will move on to the next phase of this lumps of coal soap recipe. See you in a day. So it's been about 36 hours because I ended up getting busy last night. Let's unmold these bad boys. So we're not actually going to be slicing this soap because we're going to be hand forming it into our lumps of coal. So I have a little setup here for that part. I've got a cookie sheet to put everything on, and then I've got some mica that we're going to be dusting the soap in. So we're using micas because they're not hugely strongly pigmented. We don't want to be tossing our lumps of coal in black iron oxide, or it's going to make an absolute disaster anytime anybody touches one of our lumps of coal. So I have a couple different micas here that I got from TKB Trading. So this one is After Twilight. This one actually has a really neat green hue to it, so I'm not using it, but it is beautiful. And then we have some polished silver and some Davies gray. So the Davies gray is the darker one and the polished silver is the lighter one, so I thought I would just do a little blend of the two. And then I have a sieve here for dusting the lumps of clay with, similar to as if you were, doing it with icing sugar. So just put that aside, and we're going to be just doing this by hand. So I'm going to sort of hack off some pieces of this, and it's basically just like playing with Play-Doh. So the soap is still quite soft, and we are taking advantage of that. So because these are supposed to be sort of lumps of coal, take care not to make them too similar to one another, too pretty, too uniform, too smooth. I mean, this is just like lumps of something that sort of in theory just came out of a quarry. So I'm keeping some of those sharp edges from cutting them up. And maybe try not to have any obvious thumbprints on them, since coal doesn't usually have fingerprints. Phew, that's all of them. So now for a bit of a mica dusting. I'll grab my sieve here, and I have my bowl of micas, and we're just gonna do as if we were dusting a cake. Okay, that looks pretty well and coldly dusted to me. So now all that's left to do is to put these somewhere cool and dry to age for a minimum of 3 weeks before Christmas. And you got yourself a lovely set of Christmas gifts. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and check the description box below for the links to the full written recipe on my blog, which includes links to everything that I used. And happy Christmas! I will see you next time.